Wyoming Territory, 1878. The wind whipped hard across the open prairie, dry and sharp and mean, but it was not the cold that made Barrett Zane pull hard on the reins of his horse. It was the girl tied to the fence. Barrett slid down from his saddle before his boots even hit the ground. His horse, Dusty, snorted behind him, hooves shifting uneasily in the dirt. The girl was slumped forward, her wrists bound to the top rail with rough hemp rope. Her dress was torn. Her head hung low, and nailed to the post above her was a scrap of stained wood with 3 carved words, "Too sick. Sorry." Barrett's gut clenched. He moved fast, pulling his knife from his belt and slicing through the rope with one clean stroke. She crumpled into his arms, dead weight. Not dead. No, he could feel the faint rise and fall of her breath against his chest. "Hey," he said, voice low. "You with me?" She stirred weakly. Her lips were cracked, skin pale, sweat beading her brow despite the cold. "I got you," he said. "You are not staying out here." He carried her to Dusty, wrapped her in his thick wool coat, and slung her carefully across the saddle. Her head rolled against his chest when he climbed up behind her. She smelled like dried blood and cedar smoke. She was burning up. Barrett rode hard toward his homestead, pushing Dusty faster than he ever had. The girl never spoke, just breathed, barely. He counted each breath like it was gold. It was near dark when they made it. His small cabin sat quiet under the pines. He laid her on his bed, stoked the fire high, and poured hot water from the kettle into a basin. He stripped the dirty dress from her with care and bathed her burning skin with cool cloths, jaw tight as he saw the bruises on her ribs. He did not ask questions. Not yet. She woke late the next morning, eyes fluttering open slow, confused, scared. Barrett was sitting in the chair beside the bed, one hand resting on the rifle across his lap. He did not move. "Where am I?" she croaked. "Safe," he said. "That is all you need to worry about for now." She tried to sit up, gasped in pain, and flinched. Barrett stood quickly, catching her shoulder gently. "Easy," he said. "You are sick. Starved near to death. I ain't gonna hurt you." Her eyes searched his face, wary. But she nodded, just once, and leaned back against the pillow. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "My name is Kenzie Jarrett." Barrett's chest tightened. "Barrett Zane." She looked over at the fire, lips trembling. "They left me." "Who?" "My uncle. His boys." She swallowed. "We were headed west. I got fever 2 days in. He said I was slowing them down. Tied me to that fence, left that sign." Barrett's hands curled into fists. "You are not going to die out here, Kenzie," he said. "Not while I am breathing." Her eyes met his. There was something quiet in them. Grief. Shame. But something else, too, something that looked a little like hope. She slept again after he gave her a spoonful of broth. He tended to his chores in silence, listening for her breathing. That night, she woke shaking with fever. He held a wet cloth to her neck, whispered steady comfort, and stayed by her side until dawn. By the end of the week, she was stronger. She sat up on her own, ate small meals, and asked about the horse and the land and what he was doing living alone out here. Barrett told her the truth. "I was in the war," he said. "Fought for the Union. Came back with nothing but a name and a bad leg. Bought this land with what was left of my bounty. Been here since." She nodded. "I had a sister once. Died when I was 15. Then my mama. Then my pa. I guess I held on to my uncle because it was all I had left." Barrett looked at her then. Really looked. Her face was thinner now, but her eyes were clearer. There was a strength in her, even after everything. "You got more than that now," he said. Kenzie looked down at her hands. Her voice was soft. "Why did you help me?" Barrett stood, went to the fire, poked it with the iron rod. He spoke without turning. "Because no one helped my mother when she was sick. My father left. Folks looked the other way. I swore if I ever saw that kind of thing again, I would not be one of them." She said nothing for a while. Then, quietly, "You gave me everything you had." Barrett turned back. "I would do it again." Their eyes held. The fire crackled between them. Kenzie's lips parted like she wanted to say something else, but she closed them again and looked away. That night, Barrett sat on the porch and watched the stars. The door creaked behind him. Kenzie stepped out, barefoot, wearing one of his shirts that hung almost to her knees. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. He nodded, and she settled beside him on the top step. They sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, "I do not think I ever knew what safe felt like until now." Barrett looked at her. her profile soft in the moonlight. The bruises were fading. I reckon everyone deserves to know that feeling, he said. She looked up at him. Even you. He let out a breath. Maybe. She reached for his hand, fingers warm against his. She did not say anything. She did not need to. And Barrett felt it, that quiet shift in the air. Like something broken had started to mend. Like something lost had started to be found. He held her hand tighter. Neither of them let go. Barrett's cabin sat quiet beneath a sky the color of pewter, clouds thick with the promise of snow. The air had turned brittle, and he could feel it in his knuckles as he split the last of the pine logs behind the shed. He stacked them neatly by the door, then paused, listening. Inside, the floorboards creaked softly. Kenzie was up. When he stepped in, she was standing by the stove, barefoot, wrapped in one of the old quilts stitched by his mother's hands. Her hair was damp, combed back, darker at the roots than he'd first thought. She was watching the kettle, but her eyes flicked toward him when he came through. You shouldn't be standing long, he said, brushing the snow from his shoulders. I wanted to try, she answered, voice stronger than before. I've been in that bed too long. Felt like my bones were growing into it. He crossed to the table, removed his gloves, and rubbed his hands near the stove's heat. You're stubborn. Maybe, but I'm not helpless. She turned toward him then, folding the quilt tighter at her chest. Do I look like a fool for trying? Barrett met her gaze. No, you look like someone who's still got fight in her. She smiled, faint and unsure, then turned back to the stove. I used to cook for my family. Not good at it, but I tried. My pa said I burned beans better than anyone he ever met. He pulled out a chair, sat, and leaned forward on his elbows. You want to try again? She glanced over her shoulder. You trust me not to ruin your supplies? I trust you not to quit, he said. She added a pinch of salt to the pot and stirred carefully, hands still trembling a little. Barrett watched her, noting the steadiness in her jaw, the way she stood straighter now. She had not asked for pity. Not once. After they ate, Kenzie cleared the bowls slowly, setting them beside the wash basin. She turned to him, wiping her hands on a cloth. Do you ever get tired of the quiet? She asked. Barrett answered after a pause. Only when I've got something to say. Her eyebrows lifted. Is that often? He half smiled. Not till lately. She looked down at the cloth in her hands, folding it once, then again. I keep thinking about the road west. What might have happened if you hadn't come along? He stood, moving to the hearth. Don't think on it. I can't help it. Her voice wavered, but she met his eyes. When you carried me here, I was sure I wouldn't last the night. But you didn't flinch. You didn't even hesitate. He reached for the poker, shifting a log. Didn't see much choice in it. But there was. You could have ridden on. Barrett looked at her, long and quiet. Leaving someone behind. That don't sit right with me. Never has. She nodded slowly, then moved to the chair across from his. The quilt slipped slightly from her shoulder, revealing the edge of a fading bruise, yellowing now. She didn't cover it up. I'm not asking you for anything, she said. I want you to know that. I know. I want to be worth the trouble. Barrett's voice came low. You already are. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. Kenzie tucked her legs beneath her, warming her hands around a tin mug. She watched the fire for a long time before speaking again. Do you miss people? He considered. Sometimes. I miss conversation that don't feel like talking to the trees. She looked over at him. What about your family? Gone, he said. Long time now. Did you love them? I did. She nodded, then leaned her head against the chair back. I think I forgot what that word feels like. Barrett didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, feeding another log into the fire. You don't have to remember all at once, he said. You just have to keep waking up. Kenzie watched him with something unreadable in her face. Then, softer than before, you make it sound simple. It's not, he said, but it's possible. She was quiet after that. The fire burned low, casting long shadows against the cabin walls. Barrett stood, fetched another blanket, and draped it around her shoulders without a word. She didn't pull away. Outside, snow began to fall thin and slow and soundless. Inside, there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been understood. The snow held through the next week, blanketing the world in silence. Barrett kept the path from the barn to the cabin clear with a broad-handled shovel, his breath thick in the air as he worked. Inside, the walls held the heat well enough. and Kenzie had taken to moving about the room with more ease, favoring her left side only when she stood too long. One morning, she stepped out onto the porch in his old boots and her hem pinned up to keep from dragging. Her hair was braided down her back, tied off with a strip of homespun. Barrett looked up from the woodpile, straightened. "I need something to do," she said. "I'm going mad in there." He set the axe down. "You got anything in mind?" She nodded toward the lean to buy the garden plot. "I saw a stack of dull blades in there. I can sharpen them, if you've got a whetstone." He didn't ask how she knew to use one, just fetched the stone from the shelf inside and handed it to her. When she settled on the porch steps and set to work, he returned to splitting logs, the rhythm keeping time with the stroke of her hand across the blade. Later, he found her in the root cellar, sorting through onions and checking for rot. "You don't have to, I want to," she said, not looking up. "I'm not made for sitting still." He crouched beside her, picking up a potato and turning it over in his hand. "You ever live off land like this before?" She brushed soil from her skirt. "Not exactly, but my mother taught me what she could. We kept a small patch, grew what we could, and traded the rest." Barrett nodded. "You know how to set a snare?" Her brow lifted. "For rabbits." He stood. "Come on, then." They wandered past the tree line, boots crunching softly in the crusted snow. Barrett stopped near a thicket where tracks crisscrossed the white. "Right here," he said. "No scent, no sound. Just patience." Kenzie knelt beside him, her breath fogging in the air. She watched his hands as he demonstrated the loop, the knot, the placement just so between two roots. "I think I remember," she said. "We used to use bent saplings." "That works," he said. "Just depends on what you're after." They set 3 more before heading back. As they walked, she asked, "Do you ever go into town?" "Only when I have to. Goods, postage, things I can't grow myself." "You got anyone there?" "Friends." He gave a quiet shake of his head. "Not really. Folks keep to themselves out here. Most don't remember me when I do show." "Maybe you don't give him a reason to." He glanced at her. "Maybe I don't want one." She didn't answer, but her gaze lingered on him, curious. When they reached the cabin, she went inside first, and he paused on the porch, watching the snow fall from the eaves. That night, she sat at the table with a needle and thread, mending a tear in his shirt with practiced fingers. Barrett cleaned the rifle by lamplight, the room filled with the soft rasp of cloth on metal and the occasional pop from the fire. She spoke without looking up. "Do you ever wonder what a different life might have looked like?" He looked over at her. "Sometimes, but wondering don't change what is." "Still," she said, tying off the thread. "It's something, isn't it? The idea of starting over." He set the rifle aside. "You thinking of leaving?" She met his eyes, steady now. "I'm thinking I don't know what I want. But I know I don't want to be scared every time the wind shifts." "You won't have to be," he said. Her voice softened. "I'm not afraid of the land, Barrett. I'm afraid of being alone in it." He stood, crossed the floor, and leaned his hand on the edge of the table. "You're not." She looked up at him then, the lamplight catching in her eyes. "You mean that?" "I don't say what I don't mean." She rose from the chair, still holding the shirt in her hands. "Then I guess I'll stay." Barrett exhaled, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Good." The fire burned low behind them. Outside, the wind had calmed. Kenzie folded the shirt, set it gently on the table, and reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "You gave me more than I ever thought I'd have again," she said. He nodded. "You gave me something back, too." They stood there a long time, their hands joined between them, the warmth quiet and sure. Neither needed to say more. The snow had lingered longer than usual, but by early March, the first thaw came in quiet streaks. Water dripped from the eaves in slow rhythms, and the creek behind the cabin, once sealed in ice, began to murmur again. Barrett stood by the shed one morning, oiling a hinge that had stiffened in the cold, when he heard Kenzie's footsteps approach through the softened earth. "I found your ledger," she said, holding the worn cloth-bound book in her hand. "Wasn't snooping, just looking for thread." He wiped his hands on a rag. "Guess you know what my herd's worth now." "I didn't read far," she said, "but I saw the figures. You keep clean records." He nodded once. "I trade up in Laramie every season. Used to sell hides in Rollins, but I stopped running that far after the winter of '76. She set the book down on the workbench, her fingers brushing a horseshoe. "You've done all this by yourself." "I had help once. A neighbor named Eli. He moved on last year. Said the winters were too long for his bones. Kenzie glanced toward the pasture, where the horses stood hocked deep in slush. You ever think of hiring someone again? Barrett leaned against the doorframe. Can't afford to feed a second mouth unless they earn their keep. Her eyes came back to him. Then let me earn mine. He studied her face, not out of doubt, but to be sure she meant it. You know what that means out here? It's not just chores. It's calving, fencing, riding out in storms. I don't scare easy, she said. Not anymore. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over, handed her a pair of worn leather gloves, and said, "We'll start with the tack." They spent the day in the barn, shoulder to shoulder, repairing buckles and oiling cracked leather. Kenzie worked carefully, her fingers nimble from years of sewing, though she cursed under her breath when a strap bit into her palm. "First time I rode alone," she said, threading a buckle through the breast collar. "Was the summer I turned 12. My father had me ride out after one of our milk cows. Thought I'd fall apart when I lost the trail, but I found her 3 hours later, standing in a creek, chewing grass like the world owed her nothing." Barrett chuckled low. "Sounds about right. Cows have a way of pretending they're the ones doing the work." She glanced at him, half grinning. "That was the first time I realized I could do something hard and live through it." Barrett met her eyes. "I figured that out in a trench outside Atlanta." Not the same thing, but the feeling sticks. They worked until the light shifted gold through the slats, then walked back to the cabin in a silence that felt full, not empty. That night, Kenzie brought out a small scrap of linen and began stitching by the hearth. Barrett watched her for a moment before asking, "What are you making?" She held it up. The thread formed the start of a pine tree, delicate and spare. "A piece for the wall. Thought the place could use something softer." He nodded slowly. "Never thought about hanging anything." "Most men don't," she said. "But a home's more than walls and a fire. It ought to carry what's good in the people who live there." Barrett shifted in his chair, resting an ankle on his knee. "You think this place can be that?" She didn't look up right away. Her hands kept stitching, steady and sure. "I think it's already started to become that," she said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Kenzie." She paused, needle held in midair. "I've been trying to give you space. Let you find your footing on your own terms. But I need to ask, what do you want from this place?" "From me?" She set the cloth down on her lap, the needle still threaded. "I want to wake up and not wonder where I'll sleep next. I want to work beside someone who sees me for more than what's already happened. And I want to be with someone who doesn't turn away when things are hard." Barrett's voice came low. "I can be those things." "I know," she said. He stood, walked to where she sat, and knelt beside her chair. Her hand met his, warm and certain. "I've never owed someone as much as I owe you," she said. "But I want what comes next to be ours, not just yours or mine." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Then we'll build it, right here." The fire dimmed, but the warmth in the room did not. Outside, the frost melted from the eaves, drop by drop, steady as a promise. A warm wind rose from the south as March gave way to April, carrying the sharp scent of thawed earth and pine sap. Barrett noticed the change first in the way the horses kicked up mud instead of snow, and in how the morning frost no longer clung to the cabin windows. Kenzie noticed it in her bones, how they ached less with every passing day, how the stiffness that once lived at the edge of every breath had eased into something she could carry without effort. One morning, Barrett saddled Dusty and led a second horse, an older bay named Clara, out toward the barn. Kenzie was mending a feed sack near the door when he called her name. "Feel like riding?" She looked up, brushing wool fibers from her skirt. "Where to? I want to show you something." She didn't ask questions. She fetched her shawl from the peg and met him at the pasture gate, her hands sure on the reins. Clara was easy under her, steady and slow-footed, and Barrett led them west along a trail that curved up through the higher hills where the pines stood taller and the wind moved quieter. They rode without speaking for a time, the only sound the creak of leather and the soft clop of hoofs. When they reached a narrow ridge, Barrett dismounted and tied the horses to a low branch. Kenzie followed, boots sinking into damp moss as he led her up a short rise. At the top, the land opened wide before them. A small lake lay nestled below, rimmed with reeds and still as glass. Beyond it, past the soft swell of hills, the Wind River Range rose jagged against the pale sky. Barrett sat on a flat stone and motioned for her to do the same. I come up here when the world feels too loud. Kenzie lowered herself beside him, tucking her skirt beneath her knees. It's quiet now. He nodded. It's where I buried my mother, before I built the cabin. She'd have liked it here. Kenzie looked out over the lake, her voice low. I never had a place like this. We moved too often, always chasing a better crop, a steadier job. We never stayed long enough to bury anyone. Barrett rested his forearms on his knees. I think people deserve somewhere to belong, even if they have to carve it out themselves. She turned toward him. Is that what you did? I tried. He watched a hawk wheel above the trees. But it didn't feel like mine until you came. She didn't answer at first. The wind tugged at her braid, and she reached up to tuck a loose strand behind her ear. I didn't know I could belong anywhere, she said. Not after everything. You do now? He looked at her, and she met his gaze fully. There was nothing uncertain in her eyes anymore, only steadiness. I want to stay, she said. Not just through the spring. For good. Barrett's jaw tightened, but it wasn't from doubt, it was from relief, so deep it nearly unseated him. You already have. She took his hand, fingers firm and warm. Then let's build the rest of it together. They rode down slow, stopping once to let the horses drink from the lake. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was dipping low, casting long gold shadows across the yard. Inside, Barrett pulled a small box from a drawer beneath the hearth. He'd carved it weeks ago, simple pine, sanded smooth, with a small latch made from an old clasp. Inside was a silver ring, plain but solid, passed down from his father's mother. He handed it to her without ceremony. It's yours if you want it. Kenzie opened the box and stared down at the ring. No tears came, just a quiet, radiant stillness. I do. They married in early May, beneath the cottonwoods at the creek's bend. A circuit preacher came from Laramie, a man with a weathered face who asked few questions. Barrett wore his cleanest shirt, and Kenzie wore a dress she'd sewn by hand from muslin traded with a neighbor. The only witnesses were the preacher's wife and the sky. Afterward, they shared a meal on the porch: roast rabbit, cornbread, and the last jar of sweet pickles from Barrett's cellar. Kenzie laughed when he told her she'd best learn to make more, or he'd just have to teach her. Later that summer, they tore down the small side shed and began building an addition to the cabin. A larger kitchen, a second room for cool storage, and a space she could use for sewing and keeping records. They worked side by side, sawing and hammering, stopping only to wipe sweat from their brows or share a drink of water from the barrel. By the time the first leaves turned, Kenzie had planted a kitchen garden and coaxed the soil into giving up beans, squash, and late onions. Barrett repaired the pasture fence, and together they brought in a pair of milk goats from a nearby rancher. They shared the work, the meals, and the quiet evenings by the fire. Sometimes she stitched while he read from the dog-eared copy of Emerson's essays he kept near the hearth. Sometimes they simply sat, hands joined, watching moths dance in the lamplight. One night, as frost silvered the windows and the fire burned low, she laid her head on his shoulder and whispered, I never thought I'd find peace. Barrett pressed a kiss to her hair. You didn't find it. You made it. Winter returned, but it didn't feel so long this time. They had what they needed. And more than that, they had each other. Come spring, the garden would bloom again, and the land would soften beneath their feet. A child would come the following year, strong-lunged and red-cheeked, and they would raise her in the same steadiness they gave each other every day. And through it all, the hard work, the quiet joys, the weather, and the years they stayed together, in the place they built, in the life they chose, in the love that held fast like roots dug deep in good earth.